With thunderstorms being such a prevalent theme in tales of horror, I was reminded of this one memory from my childhood. It's not so much scary as it is creepy. Even creepier to this day, I have not been able to find out what natural phenomenon would have caused this to happen. I was 5 years old at the time, and this is one of the few vivid memories I have from that long ago. It was the early spring of 1981, and I lived with my family in a small bungalow on the edge of the Baltimore city limits. Out back, we had an overhead cable run between two trees, with a metal coated steel cable hanging from it attached to a pulley. It was a run for our family dog, a sweet beagle named Becky. She was not attached to the run at the time. This particular evening, a thunderstorm raged on outside. Now, even at such a young age, I was fascinated with thunderstorms. I still am to this day. I was sitting on the screened-in covered porch out back, watching the rain and lightning, and just listening to the thunder. Then it happened. The first time lightning actually scared me. It struck in my backyard about 30 feet from where I was sitting. Actually, it struck an overhead line, traveled across the line, down the leader, and into the ground. The light was brilliant, but the sound was defeating. So, I started to cry out of fear, but the crying quickly subsided once I saw what the lightning strike had done to the yard. The grass was black and fried. Almost immediately afterwards, my parents rushed out onto the porch. My baby brother was 2 at the time, and I heard him crying from inside the house. My mother stared at the lawn, not knowing what to make of it. She was memorized for a moment, but quickly ran back inside to get my brother and tried to soothe him. My father surveyed the lawn for a moment in shock. He had never seen anything like that. None of us had. Holy shit left his lips before he came back to reality and realized I was sitting there. That was the first time I've ever heard my father swear. He called back inside the house to tell my mother to call the fire department. Then he checked me too to see if I was alright. I was fine. The fear and the crying had passed as soon as I saw the black burnt grass. I could hear my mother inside on the phone with the fire department. Now, being so young and still so fascinated with the mundane world, I was truly excited. Freaky colored grass, and a fire engine. About 10 minutes later, a fire engine pulled up in front of the house, and me and my father went out to greet them. Mom was still inside tending to my brother. At this point, the storm had started to let up, and the thunder was far less frequent and moving away. My father and I walked around to the back of the house with the firemen, meeting my mother out back while she held an umbrella over herself and my brother, who was in her arms finally starting to quiet down. A half a dozen firemen trampled through the yard in full firefighting gear, inspecting the strangely colored grass, while my father and I looked on. About 10 minutes of inspecting everything, the crew leader from the firemen came to talk to my father. "I don't know what to tell you," he said. "I've been a fireman for 20 years and I've never seen anything like this. It seems safe." He handed my father his card and got my father's information. He instructed to my father to call him if he noticed anything else odd with the grass, and he said he'll call my father if he found anything out. The grass eventually, over the course of a few weeks, turned to a natural color. I never did find out what caused it. That was 30 years ago. I don't run home every time I see a thunderstorm on the way. In fact, I'm the sort who would rather not be home during a thunderstorm. When this happened, actually, I was living in a college dormitory. It was my sophomore year of school, and I was rooming with a good friend named Peter that I had made during my previous year. So, we got along great. I just don't want anyone to think that there was anything at home that kept me from going back. No, I just really like being out in the storm. And no, that doesn't mean I like being rained on, because although it likely doesn't bother me as much as it bothers other people, I don't really care for it either. What I do like is being at a cafe, a bookstore, hell, even a Walmart during a storm. When I got out of class, I saw that the sky was very, very dark. The pressure was dropping, and I could tell that there would be quite a storm on the way. I opted at that point to head over to the bookstore or coffee shop that I mostly like to study in. I figured that most students would be headed back to their dorms and the place would be empty. Well, I was definitely right about the place being empty, other than two employees, one on the bookstore register and the other on the barista. There was only me and one other person in the place. It wasn't a big store, like Borders. It was a little place. There was a table right by the window that I put my stuff on, and I could watch the storm from there. I barely made it before the rain began to fall, and it fell hard. I was working on my laptop running through some statistics through SPSS and really having a calm, nice time. It was after quite a bit of work that some movement outside caught my eye. Looking out the window, I was surprised to see my dorm roommate outside in the rain. He didn't have an umbrella and he was soaked from head to toe. He was walking along the opposite side of the street from me. He stopped in front of a shop and looked back and forth a few times. After that, he turned and walked back the way that he came. I found it weird, but I really wasn't sure what to think about the whole thing. Maybe he just got caught in the storm and figured that he was already soaked, so he might as well just go about his business. I don't know. About half an hour later, I saw him again. This time, he continued walking in the direction and didn't turn back. Maybe he had forgotten something the first time. I'm not really sure. However, the fact that he had been walking around in the rain for such a long period of time without an umbrella had me a little concerned. I got up, walked over to the door of the bookstore cafe, opened it, and looked for him. I didn't see him anywhere. I sent him a text message as soon as I got back in the store, but didn't really expect to hear back from him. I let him know I was in the cafe and wondered what he was up to, walking in the storm. If he was soaked to the bone, then it was pretty unlikely that he would be able to text on his smartphone. I put it out of my mind. After a while, the storm died down a little bit. When it stopped raining, I went and headed back to the dorm room. The sky was still dark and it was obvious that the storm was not over, but I felt getting back to the comfort of my room. I was also curious as to what was up with my roommate. When I got back to the room, the door was unlocked. I immediately thought that meant my roommate was in there. However, he wasn't. It was very odd that he had left the door unlocked. I've known him to do that, but everyone makes mistakes every now and then, right? As I was sitting there at my desk, I got a notification for a text message. I looked at my phone and saw that it was from Peter. The message was for me not to come back to our room because he had a girl over there. I found the message to be pretty chilling. It was so odd that I got up, went and locked the door. I also put a chain on it. I went back to my desk and looked at my phone. I kept wondering how to reply to the message. It was so weird. I guess I wanted to know what he was up to, so I replied that I wouldn't come back until he told me that he was done. I don't know why, but I figured that he was up to some sort of game and I wanted to see what. About half an hour later, the doorknob moved. Immediately, I got up and crept to the door and looked out the peephole. Some guy I've never seen in my life was trying to get into the room. I went and grabbed my phone in case I needed to call the campus police. I heard a key slip into the lock and this person attempted to open the door. Thank God I put the chain on. The very moment the chain restrained the door, it quickly closed and I heard whoever it was actually run down the hallway. The whole situation was too weird and I called the campus police. I tried texting Peter several times. I never got a response. He never came back to the dorm either. Eventually, a missing persons report was filed. This happened 5 years ago, and neither me nor Peter's family have heard anything about him. No one had keys to the room but us two, so whoever that man was, he had gotten Peter's key, also his cell phone. Whatever he was coming back to the dorm room for, he was trying to make sure I wasn't there. I've never seen him again either. I do miss Peter quite a bit, but I also wonder if I would have disappeared too if I hadn't been so nervous to put that chain on the door. Probably better that I did. When I was a teenager, I lived quite a decent walk away from school. Both of my parents also worked into the evening. I could probably count on my hand the amount of times my parents may have driven me either to or from school. I was definitely a bus kid. I was pretty active in drama at school. For my freshman and sophomore years in high school, they would run one extra bus after hours for students who had to stay behind at school for any other reason. However, before my junior year, some budget issues forced them to eliminate certain things. This bus ride was deemed one of those things. You see, most kids lived in a town and could walk home after if they needed. The times that I rode this other bus, hell, if there were even more than 5 students on it at any given time, that would have quite surprised me. So I had a choice when the bus was eliminated. I could either give up drama, which was not about to happen, or I could wait until my parents got off work, which I didn't want to happen, or I could walk home, which is what did happen. I don't want to give you the wrong idea though. It wasn't like I was going off on this 3 hour trek after school each time. It normally took me a little bit over an hour and a half to make the walk, and honestly, I didn't mind it for the most part. However, on the day this story occurred, there had been a storm brewing all day. During each class, I found myself staring out the window more than anything. I kept hoping it would dissipate. When it wasn't my last class, I had to decide whether I wanted to take the bus home and miss drama or risk walking home in the rain. Quite obviously, I chose to take the chances and walk. I felt lucky when I got out of drama. Although the clouds had been looming all day, no rain had actually fallen. I just hoped that this could continue a couple more hours so I could go home nice and dry. Just as luck would have it, though, not 20 minutes into my walk, little rain droplets began to fall. When a nice sprinkle was threatening to turn into something worse, I decided to cut through this closed off property that had an abandoned old factory sitting on it. It was not gated off, but it had plenty of signs on the property telling students not to trespass. However, going through it would shave off some of my time and hopefully I could beat the downpour. I didn't get halfway through the property when the rain began to fall, accepting that I would get wet, but not wanting to get soaked. I made a run straight for the factory. I was originally going to stand under the overhang, however, two things. I figured out pretty quickly that doing that would not keep me much drier, and I noticed the door where I'd been standing was broken and not boarded shut. I figured I could just go ahead and hang out right inside the door until the rain quieted down, because going into an abandoned building never turns out bad, right? I know a lot of people get kicks from being inside abandoned buildings, but I don't quite get that myself. It was dirty, covered in graffiti with empty beer bottles strewn about. Undoubtedly, this meant it was a popular place for teenagers to go and drink. I thought maybe I'd see if some of my friends might be interested in doing this. It was then I thought I heard something coming from inside the factory. Immediately after, there was a defeating crack of thunder. I heard it, but didn't give it much mind the first time, but then I heard it again. It sounded like it was something moving inside in the jacket room. I told myself it was likely a snake or a rat, but I also realized the storm was rather loud actually. Whatever I was hearing was definitely bigger than that. I considered simply running back into the storm. It was really coming down now, however. I would have been soaked in an instant. And for all I knew, what I was hearing was nothing big. Hell, it may have been a cat, and I decided it was probably a feline. There was another ear-destroying crack of thunder, and then I definitely heard what sounded like an awful moan or something. I thought that I must have wandered into something that I probably wish that I hadn't. I almost thought about leaving and going into the rain, but when I heard the noise again, I decided to follow it and see what was going on. Wow, my heart was beating so hard as I walked around the corner. I saw the open door to the room, and after taking a moment to catch my breath, I turned the corner and looked in. I was freaked to see a girl about my age in the room. Her hands and feet were bound and she had a gag in her mouth. She looked at me with pure terror on her face. After taking a moment to recover, I ran over and began untying her. When I ungagged her, she gave me a hug like she knew me. She got up and insisted that we leave the building right then. I tried to get her to explain, but she ran past me. We both ran into the rain, immediately being soaked. We were closer to the school than my house, so we ran back there when she called the police. The girl had been abducted by 3 guys around my age. In fact, 3 guys who went to my school. She didn't know why they had left her there in the factory, but they tied her up and dropped her off there. She was expecting them to come back for God knows what, but I guess fortunately I got there before them. I don't want to go into what happened afterward. Although no one was physically hurt, the girl was seriously mentally hurt. However, no one was punished for what happened afterward either. I hate thinking about that.